All right. Good evening. I would like to call this January 16th Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order. Let's start out with a roll call. Hisham Elkawad.
Here.
Syed Safavian.
Here.
Ajay Chakrapani.
Here.
Mark Boffman, I am here. Mike Bresco.
Here.
John Bachman is here. Stepped out for just a second. Hong Yang Wang is here. And on the call, we have Sudha Sankara. Sudha, can you hear us all right?
I can hear your chair, and I'm here.
And we can hear you too. That's very good. All right, next let's do approval of the agenda. We have a couple of items on the agenda this evening. Review of our Planning Commission year-end feedback and an overview, introduction, let's call it, of form-based codes. Anybody have any comments on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll call the agenda approved. Next is approval of the minutes from our way back to December 5th of last year meeting. Anybody have any comments on the meeting minutes from the December 5th meeting? Nope. Okay, we'll call those meeting minutes approved. Next, we will do non-agenda public comment. Reminder, 3 minutes per person. So let's do non-agenda public comment. Again, the agenda is our Planning Commission feedback comments and the form-based code. So this would be other things than that. Who would like to make non-agenda public comment? Mary. She's right behind you. Oh, good.
Good evening, Planning Commission. This is Mary Wichter. I've been in Sammamish 24 years. First, I wanted to thank everybody for all the work that you do. John Bachman reapplied and got elected, and that was an amazing, detailed scenario of all the work that you've done. And thank you all for having the courage to do this and keep with us in the new year and all the topics. I also wanted to thank Olena for the great write-ups that she does of the minutes and the most recent ones from the Happy New Year. I tried to emphasize and say that one of the things that makes commissions and meetings important is that you take public feedback, and that if you hear something that you like, you need to learn how to integrate it into your discussions and also make motions and amend things. Otherwise, it's just public comment that happened and it never gets used. And if you don't know how to do that, or you're afraid to, you can say, hey, I heard this. What about this? Should we consider it? And then I think that your recommendations also are really important going to the city council. And in the last 5 years, I can't think of a time where they got a recommendation from the Planning Commission and council said, we don't care, we're just gonna do what we want. Once in a while, they won't do one of your suggestions, and there's a reason why, but you get to do that formally, and so do we. So I think that's very important. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about, I sent in some things from Bozeman, Montana, where it's very similar to Sammamish. They're a couple years ahead in the development of homes. I sent in a thing from a consultant in Denver who recommends, or who, not recommends, who studied the economic development and says if you're going to have a neighborhood center, that would be smaller than a town center. So a neighborhood center that would be walkable and people could live. You need about 3,300 dwelling units. And you've heard it from me before, but I thought I'd give it to you actually from the consultant. So in the email, there's a link, and then I should tell you where to go to so you can listen. And he does speak for longer at the meeting, and he actually speaks at 2 meetings. But if you just listen to about 17 minutes, he really covers it. And in his presentation, he also has the different pictures of what different housing types look like. Because in Sammamish, we have 85% big single-family homes, and we have 15%, which is like multifamily or other things. And I think there's only about 2,000, maybe 3,000 multifamily units, because we were like 6% moving to 10%. We're not like the other towns, and we need to have more development of things because our finances aren't working. And in 2029, the city's expenses are going to overrun what our incomes is. And really the only solution for fixing that is to have more housing built, and it needs to be built in town center as the first place because that's ready to go. And we don't want to have big single family homes. We want to have the variety of housing. So if you could look at my email, and maybe I'll resend it after this meeting. I copied you from City Council. It's from Bozeman, Montana, and it's on neighborhood centers. You need at least 3,300 dwelling units to be able to support that, to make it work. Because you just can't build commercial and think it's going to work. You have to have people that are going to use it and be there. So thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Paul?
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Happy New Year. Comment today is in alignment with what I sent in today, and it's not too late to add to our comp plan this next year. My non-agenda comment is about factoring in external and internal housing need target numbers into the 2024 to 2044 comprehensive plan, and then potentially assign some to the town center as well as the rest of the city. The comp plan does a good job at keeping our regional growth target low, which I support, as well as having 100% of our target allocated to affordable workforce housing from 30% to 80% AMI, which is much needed in Sammamish. But the new comp plan does not address setting internal legislative numbers as targets for market rate housing shortages that are substantial, from 500,000 to 1.4 million in our community, and some higher end condominiums and townhomes, which we have none of, that are priced over 1.5. I support implementing the current comp plan as it's written with a placeholder. And the placeholder is to legislatively set citywide and then town center market rate target numbers, then implement the comp plan with those changes added. Use these numbers as primary guiding lights to study optimal town center alternatives to begin remedying genuine, long-standing, local market rate housing needs. Planning to meet internal market rate needs based on quantified need factors is 25 years overdue, and these needs will not run afoul of our regional growth target, as it does not contemplate authentic internal housing needs. Local market rate shorting needs, I would remind, are much larger than affordable housing needs in Sammamish. Not more important, just larger. Tell me, how is it not in community interest to know what market rate housing need factors are? How is it not good for the community to compare consequences of meeting those needs or not? And how is it not good to make legislative informed choices on setting some target numbers for market rate needs? So I posit doing this is the most important thing our city can do at this point in time. Appreciate the chance to speak.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody online?
No hands raised online.
Let's move on to our main topics for this evening. So the first one is going to be some review discussion about our Planning Commission rules, guidelines, suggestions for improvements. And to start out with, one of the things we're going to suggest, and I'm going to do right now, is that to try to help manage time, we're going to make a guesstimate about how much time to allocate to each topic on the agenda. So in this case, I'm going to say 20 minutes for this first discussion and an hour for the second one. So that would put us 7 o'clock at the end of the topic about the Planning Commission year-end feedback, and 8 o'clock for our overview of form-based codes, and that gives us a little time for public comment after. Now, that won't mean that we ever are limited to that. It's only a guideline to help people remember that we have multiple topics, or that we're trying to target getting ourselves done on time. Okay, so now that I have tried that, and we'll see if I am even anywhere in the range on my guess, and in the future we'll do better at actually putting it on the agenda, and we'll find ways to do that. But let's dive into reminders of what we talked about and what we're going to try to do to make the meetings even better than they already are.
The pressure. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Good evening, Planning Commission. I'm Miriam Leitner, the Planning Manager. I'm here tonight, as Chair Boffman said, to follow up on all of the great and really thoughtful feedback that you all shared at the December 5th meeting. Our staff team met to review your ideas and discuss what would be feasible for trying out this year. So tonight I'm going to share our plan with you all for your input. So starting with general items, we really liked the idea of doing an annual training for all commissioners. We thought it'd be nice to pair that with a potluck, which we've done historically every year, to allow an opportunity for commissioners and staff to get to know one another a little bit more as well. Our city clerk has agreed to join the training to talk about the Open Public Meeting Act and public records and share best practices for public meetings. And we're hoping to do the training and potluck in May when the new youth board representatives start their terms. We're also going to be working with the clerk's office and legal to develop some policies related to communication for planning commission. So you have clear guidelines on what you can do and what you need to stay away from to ensure that you're not violating the Open Public Meeting Act, which was something that was mentioned on the 5th. Finally, we think it's also a good time to review and amend the Planning Commission bylaws as well as specific sections of SMC Chapter 2.60 to ensure that they reflect how we're doing things now. They seem to be in need of a little updating. David will be attending the February 6th meeting to start that work with all of you. And in terms of things we can do before the Planning Commission meetings to support you all, we will definitely be sharing examples and providing supplemental materials and packets whenever possible. If the supplemental materials are lengthy, we'll try to send them out ahead of time just to allow more time. Additionally, we wanted to follow up on Convio, the software used by Framework to assist us with the comprehensive plan review. Since Framework is the consultant for the Town Center Plan and Code Amendment project, we can utilize Convio for that, which is going to be really helpful. We are also going to be working with legal to identify an alternative tool for reviews that complies with the Open Public Meeting Act so that we can use that for the rest of our work as well. And we wanted to highlight two things in March to help commissioners prepare for meetings. The first are short prep sessions that we thought, again, that we'd pilot for March. These would be 15 to 30-minute sessions available on the Tuesday before the meeting from noon to 1 to have questions answered or further discuss any items with staff ahead of the meeting. A link will be sent out when the packets are sent so that people can sign up if they're interested for those, and we'll test it out and see how it goes. The second is a new Q&A process. So similarly to what I just mentioned, we'll have a link when the packets get sent out to a jot form with just a few questions that you can fill out to share your questions. They'll be due noon on Tuesday, and then staff will export the question, provide answers, and post them by the end of the day on Wednesday before the meeting. So we'll go ahead and test that out for March as well and kind of see how it goes and tweak as needed. And lastly, there's a few things we wanted to try during the meetings. We'll be labeling exhibits more clearly. This was not something that you mentioned, but it was something that's been on our minds. So really trying to label each page of the exhibits, so as you're going through your long packets, you can see what's what, and trying to show how many pages in each exhibit. So similarly to this slide, you'll see like 4 or 5 in the exhibit, so you know how long it is. And similarly, we'll be doing kind of what you see here on the slides with the Planning Commission date, as well as the total number of pages and which slide we're on, so you can help track progress and refer back more easily. We're also going to be working with our consultants and staff to make sure that we're providing detailed introductions. We heard what you were saying about, having gaps in between topics and having a hard time remembering where things left off, so we'll be providing more detailed introductions as we start topics to help bridge that gap a little bit. We're also going to be trying to use more photos and graphs and charts whenever possible to help illustrate information. And we're going to be working to ensure our font size is larger so that you all can read everything, which is important. To help us be more efficient with our meeting time, we're also going to make sure that staff and consultants try to table off-topic questions to be answered later to keep the discussion more focused. And then finally, as Chair Baughman has already done, we've asked the Planning Commission Chair to share an estimated time allocated for each item to kind of help you all gauge how much time we're going to be taking up. And again, this is just a recommendation, and we can extend the time as needed. It's very flexible, but just something to kind of keep in the back of your minds. So before I open things up to questions or comments, I just wanted to reiterate that these are all just things that we're trying. They might not be perfect, and so we are really looking for your continued feedback throughout the year to help us tweak things and make sure that things are working well. So with that, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Miriam. So I wanted to ask the Tuesday pre-meetings, would those be okay to do on here, or do they need to be in person?
No, those can be virtual.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had the same questions.
It's always better in person, but in the middle of the day, it might only work if it's virtual. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Matt's gonna rub this in my face for the rest of the year.
So I have one question. So you said that we could ask the questions on Tuesday in preparation for answers coming by Wednesday, so that when we are here on Thursday, would you recap that on Thursday to say, here was a question, here is the response, and we got this thing, or how does that work?
I think we would post them somewhere. I'm assuming we might republish the packet on Wednesday night with the questions and the answers in there.
Got it. So when we go through the packet on, let's say, Thursday, a last-minute study, for example, then we will actually see those questions and answers in
Yeah,
that.
and I think, if we're noting as we're reviewing the questions, like, okay, 3 people had the same question, clearly we need to go over this more, we'll integrate it into our presentations. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. The idea with that is that we are trying to reduce the amount of questions that come while you make the presentation. Got it. Thank you.
Syed, go ahead.
Number of questions. One of the things that I brought it up and actually was brought up as a public comment is that what is the process of responding to the comments that we hear from the public? Aren't we supposed to get the response at the next meeting about you heard that, and from the staff point of view, that's how you're going to respond? Is yes, or we include it, or no, that's the reason that we can't incorporate the comment that we heard from the public. I didn't see that as a part of the discussion.
Yeah, so typically we rely on the planning commission or the city council to elevate the comment, like Mary Wichter was saying. So if you're hearing public comment and you think it's an issue you want to address or discuss, we rely on you all to say, hey, we heard Mary say earlier XYZ, we'd like to talk more about that. Or, hey, we heard what Mary, what Mary Wichter said, on a night where you're making action, right, and you would maybe make a motion to integrate that in, depending on.
At that meeting, or should we send a comment in a written form and an email that on such date we heard from the public on this issue, and then that would give you the time to look at it and then come back and what is the best way to deal with that?
I think what would be helpful for us is if you're hearing something where you'd like staff to do more research or to respond, do you think it's something that's interesting, to let us know in the meeting, like, this is something that we want more research done on and we think is important, then we can know to come back and take the time and do that. Otherwise, it's hard to, there's a lot of comments, right? It's hard to know which ones you guys want to move forward and which you don't. And so it will just help us know which ones to prioritize.
And I'm assuming in this case you're talking about the comments about the items that is on an agenda.
Preferably.
Not those that they're not.
If I could just add, if there's a comment where the response would require us to expend resources, like if there's a lot of staff time or we would have to bring in a consultant, that would have to be another discussion. That would likely require the entire commission respond and provide us with direction.
Then you would bring it back as an action item?
Yes, if that's the request of the commission, it aligns with, where we're headed for, if it's a plan or some other, effort that we're completing. If it's something that is diametrically opposed to kind of the direction we're heading, then that's another, discussion that the planning commission should have.
I would also just piggyback on that. It may be an item for city council need to make a decision on as well, particularly if there's budget involved. So it just, I guess, depends on what the issue is and how much work is involved. But I think we can help you all figure that out as we do an analysis and discuss it more.
the other one is under general suggestion. I'm reading from the material that you sent us. Review of the final documents, and that has happened a number of times. For instance, it was somewhat unusual that the transportation master plan came to the commission and we voted on it, but the one that was presented to the council was not the one that we saw. So we didn't see the final product. So I actually was asked by one of the commission, have you seen it and all that? And I didn't know how to respond because the final product was not the one that we actually discussed it. I hope that is not going to happen. I don't see any reference that you're going to deal with that issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure in that specific example exactly what happened, but I think,
There are a number of volumes on the transportation master plan, and the first 2 or 3 was the public works director. She came and made a presentation, but at that time she didn't have the material.
I see.
But she didn't come back to us with
Sure.
the last 2 volumes, which was basically the main part of the transportation master plan, and was the subject discussion at the city council, and they voted on it, but we didn't get a chance to see
Yeah.
that and discuss it.
Yeah, so I think, some projects, the way they are, they don't always go to planning commission, but I think what we can do is do a better job if you guys are doing a review of something to at least communicate, hey, there's a new draft that's going to city council and here's the link so you guys can go online and review and provide your feedback through that process.
That would be very useful.
Okay.
Also, I don't know, I'm the only one that I've had this problem. Once in a while, I get the documents and then it needs a code, you need a password and all that. And I discussed that with Elena, and have you resolved that issue that is not going to happen?
We are trying very hard to figure out why it is happening and to get it resolved. Lena is working with IT to make that happen.
And the other thing, as far as the presentation material, sometimes the documents, the font are so small, and I'm the kind of person that actually take the time and print it, hard copy, and look at it. Is that something that you can work with and I brought it to the consultant attention, and I hope that is going to be taken care of.
Yeah, I'm going to request, let me know how you feel, but I think we'll aim for size 12 font for printed materials. Okay, so we'll try to make that our standard.
And something that is not on the list, maybe something that I have in other places that I've worked with the Planning Commission. What is the possibility of arranging some field visit on when we talk about the zoning, when we talk about examples? I know that you can't do it at night, but probably some of us would be available to dedicate some time on Saturday or Sunday, and as a group go and see different examples. Is this something that, I'm opening it up for discussion. I don't know what the other commissions, they think about that suggestion.
I do think you have to be careful of the Open Public Meeting Act, so it would have to be you guys going in 2s or 3s and no more than 3 people. There's also an issue of staff, like if you go by yourself, we provide the information and you go do that yourself. That's one thing. I think when you're looking at doing something on a weekend or after work hours for staff, then we'd be required to do overtime, which we don't have in our budget. So I think just being cognizant of that, but I do think it's a great idea. For me, I find it really helpful to see things in person. So it's definitely something we can explore more.
Or at least if this is not possible, you would give us the indication and say, okay, example of this is in the city of Newcastle, and this is the address, go and look at it yourself.
Yeah.
That would be actually
Yeah, absolutely.
useful too.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks very much.
We'll be like in elementary school and have our once-a-year field trip. Anyone else? Go ahead, John.
As long as a field trip to Newcastle is at the golf course. So I think this is worth mentioning. It actually kind of happened at council Tuesday night, just to remind ourselves that we don't respond directly to public comment at the time. So we're setting up a process to address those things if we want to daylight something. And at council Tuesday night, there's a problem with a fiber installer, and council actually directly addressed them back. That's pretty rare, but for the most part, I just want to remind everyone. Also wanted, I guess, thank staff and the consultant. We're getting into really complex things, and we're getting a lot of presentation materials in PowerPoint. And in the most general sense, nobody's just reading the slides to us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So those are my only comments.
Matt just poked me and remind me to ask you, Sudha. Sudha, do you have any comments or questions?
No, yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to thank you for putting the agenda and then the topic and the time. That's very useful. And thank you, Miriam, for taking all our discussions and coming up with solutions. I'm actually excited and looking forward to it. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And a shout out to Lena, too, who listened to the last meeting and helped take notes.
Thank you, Lena.
No, actually, this list really is very useful. Thank you very much.
Anything else?
I'll just add, because we still have a few moments. No, I thought you said 8. Anyways.
You're okay.
Actually, I was going to echo how well you captured. There are a bunch of comments, and they were summarized beautifully. And I'm looking forward to trying those things out. Anything that would allow us to be better prepared to deal with the more complex topics. And these seem like a good step in the right direction. So, and I thank you, Syed, for all the other comments. They will definitely enrich what we need to do. So, thanks.
Okay. Looks like everybody's good. So let's move on to our new business topic for this evening, which Matt is going to discuss form-based codes. And I think it's fair to say this is an introduction, right?
Very brief introduction.
It doesn't have to be too brief. Since you're the timekeeper over here, we have an hour.
No, we don't.
You can do it faster if you want.
It's literally going to take me 5 minutes, and I bet you have 10 minutes worth of questions. So I'm shooting for 15. We shall see. Okay, did that work? Okay. Am I able to? There we go. So this lines up with the work that's going on in the town center over the next few months, well, through the spring and summer and likely into the fall, which includes several topics. We just released the notification for SEPA scoping. That'll evolve into a supplemental environmental impact statement. Along with that, we're going to do a traffic impact review. We're also looking at housing diversity and affordability. We're going to review the process in the town center code. And then lastly, we hope to move towards a form-based code. And I just wanted to be sure that you have some familiarity with what a form-based code is. It's very different from a typical zoning code. We have a bit more than that. We have a zoning code with design guidelines, which I'll show you in a minute, but it is just different. It's more graphic. How about I just show you? There you go. So what is a form-based code? It's basically taking into consideration the design of the site and the building, and then also looking at the street frontage. It's looking at green space. It's looking at sidewalks. It's looking at all of these elements kind of that work with development, like putting that all together. Essentially, you have a lot or a building type, a site type, and you match that with basically your sidewalk, your street, the size, the width, the functionality of the street. That's something that typical zoning doesn't do. And the code itself, and you can see this example. I have a, do we use laser pointers here? Is that okay? Yeah. So
You can start a new trend.
there you go. Everyone gets one. Yeah, this exhibit, it's pretty typical for a form-based code. It's very graphic in nature in the sense that you should be able to see it and pick up what it's trying to convey. But the most important is this public space, whether it be the street or landscaping, green space, hardscape. You know, we have sidewalks, we have outdoor dining here, very typical for a form-based code. We don't really have that in our code right now, but as far as working with developers in the development of the town center, it should produce much better results. The purpose, as I've been saying, is it's more comprehensive, it's cohesive, you know, it brings in all the elements in the development together. It's also more predictable in the sense that the developer should be able to read that and know exactly what the city is looking for. It really expresses the vision of the city and the town center. And then lastly, it captures that community character. This is all of this is placemaking. We're essentially building a new neighborhood within the city. And really, we want to be sure that it's built to human scale, that it's walkable, you know, you have interconnected streets, and all of these things create active space, you know, that you look for in a town center. If you've visited a town center where, you know, or a downtown, hopefully kind of a downtown, but shrunken down a little, where you don't have like these big wide streets, that it's walkable, you can find a restaurant, eat outdoors, there's maybe a plaza area. Those are elements of a town center that are the key to really making it an active space. So otherwise, it's really just more strip centers and parking lots. And I don't think that's what we want here. So, how is this different than typical zoning? It's very different in the sense that conventional zoning will tell you this. This is probably where we are as far as our town center code. The form-based code would essentially do this. So Euclidean zoning, which is traditional zoning, it's focused on land use and bulk requirements, basically your setbacks, your height, and, you know, in the use itself in the building. Very clear, typical zoning ordinances are very clear about the separation of different uses. Here, we're promoting mixed use in the sense that you have ground floor commercial, and then above that, you have residential. The building and site design are often considered separately. If you've evaluated a zoning code, you typically have a zoning code, a subdivision code, you might have streets, all of those being separated. A form-based code joins them together. And again, it's about that public space, that, you know, the open space in the streets, how they operate, sidewalks, plazas, you name it. All of those need to be a part of this. And I think I'm just repeating that same point. Is that right? Well, yeah, okay. And then also the building and site design aspects are considered separately, in the sense that an engineer, and it will develop the site, essentially develop the site plan, whereas an architect will develop the, you know, the building itself. And those two may never meet. Those two may not, you know, certainly not in the same firm, but, you know, they're not required to work together. This requires that they work together, that they're on the same page. And so all of those elements, whether it's the building, the site, and then the public space, are all joined together. That's really the focus of a form-based code. Are there any questions?
Go ahead, Syed.
Matt, in the past, I brought up number of times the importance of the urban design.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about form-based code, are there some consideration given to the concept of urban design and the kind of things like building modulation, colors,
Yes.
landscaping, and all that? Are they part of the form-based code?
Architectural design guidelines would be part of it. Landscaping requirements would be
How
part
about
of
building modulations?
it. The articulation of a building? Yes, that should be part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about the design, basically the public works design standards?
Should
as
be
it
part
relates
of
to
it.
the transportation.
Street
For instance,
standards.
street standards would be part of the form-based
Yes.
code, or you're going to
Yes.
modify that to fit the urban design concept that you want to see?
A typical street, so we have a few different types of streets, but they're unlike town center streets. And so they would be, the town center streets would have their own street standards.
Can you go back to the previous slide, please?
Yes.
The original one? No. the main one. No, right there. See right in here, look at how wide the sidewalk is.
Yes,
This is not consistent with the city standards, because sidewalks in a city is about 5 feet.
I'm not proposing this.
I know,
Yeah.
but that's exactly why I'm bringing it up,
Right.
is that hopefully you're going to have different design standards that
Yeah.
would be applicable,
Yes.
that would be a part of form-based code, that they're not necessarily matches the city standards.
We 100% agree with each other. Yes,
Street width,
Yes.
not a 12-foot lane.
yes,
Sidewalk width, curb and gutter,
Yes.
bicycle facilities and all that. I'm assuming, I'm bringing it up, and I hope that all these will be a part of the form-based code.
that is my hope. Yes. Yeah, so from what I've seen, and I've only been here a short time, and there's kind of different ways that the development of a town center will unfold. And good or bad, sometimes you have, just one developer who's going to build everything, and you work out all the details, on the plan, negotiate, and then it moves forward. Here we have separate owners. There is one prominent owner, but the rest of the town center is separate owners. And so we need a tool in order to convey that message. Now, with STCA, the prominent owner in the town center, we have been accomplishing some of the things that a form-based code would do through development agreements. And that's not necessarily how planning should work. I mean, you have the opportunity to do that, and then you can make some tweaks and changes and that sort of thing. But overall, it should, the planning commission should be setting the table as far as conveying the vision of the community, conveying the vision of the town center. And so that's what we hope by including all of these different things.
And you have the consultant, work on it?
Yes, yeah, they've been working on it. This is part of this same effort that completed the comprehensive plan. And there's a mountain of work to do, but yeah, we're moving forward with it.
Thank you.
Ajay?
Yeah, I think you covered this, but I just want to confirm one thing.
Yeah.
Does the form-based code align to an architect's vision or a civil engineer's plan?
Well, it should be both.
Hybrid.
Yeah, and
Okay.
hopefully they both have the vision and,
Okay.
the technical skill to be able to put this on paper.
Yes. As the son of a civil engineer, and God rest my dad's soul, but he had decades of experience, and not one time has he said, yep, this is exactly how I'm going to do it when an architect gives it, because he would always say, oh, a civil engineer needs to focus on so many things that the architect just glosses over.
Right.
Right? And the architect would do the same kind of a thing
Yes.
with regard to this thing. How do we align that? Because the moment we put this, a picture says 1,000 words that even if we say 1,000,000 after that, people are not going to remember. They'll remember the picture. And they'll say that, oh, I expected a wide sidewalk where there were places to sit down, and now I'm seeing a smaller sidewalk.
Right.
Right? So how do we align to that vision?
Through a form-based code. I think that's the solution there. I think that's what brings it all together.
I see.
And to provide, so I showed these slides on just a couple of examples of what a form-based code looks like. I am not sure what I did. Am I still,
You're not in presentation, so you need to click
okay,
that, and then you should be good.
there we go. There's a lag, that's what
Yes.
it is. Okay. I've got you. Yeah, so they work together, the pictures, the graphics, and then also the rules. And you see on the left, all the graphics, on the right are the rules. They should work together. Basically, on the right is describing what is happening on the left.
Got it.
And
Got
so-
it. And that's where they come together, the
Yes.
architect's vision as well as the civil engineer's
Yes.
plan.
And you're not going to find that in most, we have some examples in our town center code, but really putting them into action and really, identifying the important aspects of development, form-based code does that.
Got it. My last question. I I was thinking in my head, how would this work when we have a transportation master plan and we're trying to do a plan around it and all of those things. And sometimes that is based on an expectation, right?
Right.
We expect Sound Transit to have this coming up, or we expect that there'll be, I don't know, light rail coming up here or something like that, right? As we do it 20 years down the road. Doesn't that involve the other agencies to provide the same kind of this one, and does that dampen the success rate of this kind of a plan?
Not as far as the code goes, the form-based code. I don't, as far as light rail, and I haven't heard anything as far as the planning of a light rail.
Yeah, that was a very hypothetical
Right,
situation I was
okay.
bringing up. I don't think that's coming here, but
So
still.
the important elements of a town center are walkability and interconnected streets. And, in order to, you basically improve circulation better than what you have at your typical strip center, your power center, all of that. If you're in a town center driving, you should have traffic calming, you should have options as far as, going to different, parts of the city. Like for our town center on 4th Street, you can go to 228, or you can go to 222. You have different options. In the future phases of the town center, you're going to have another street that connects to 228. So it's really about creating that grid pattern that you see in most urban areas, in most cities, and, just on a smaller scale. And so, but overall, the traffic will be evaluated, and, we're going to look at the level of service of the streets and the intersections.
Yeah.
Got it.
I would just add DKS, who's doing our transportation master plan and our bike and pedestrian plan, is a member of our project team for this project as well. So they're doing reviews and they're being part of the work that we're doing around
Okay, which means that somehow their work would also come into this kind of a effort.
Yes.
that we-
Yeah.
I mean, it would not be separated out, is what I'm saying. Got it.
Yeah, the bike ped plan, that's important too, because that'll be happening this year as well. And we need to be sure that, there's the trail connections to the town center as well. And so any opportunity that people, aren't forced to drive, we need to take advantage of that. And so if you live within a quarter mile, half mile of the town center, you should be able to walk there safely without getting in your car. And so, or bike. And so, yeah, all of those are important elements.
Got it. Thanks, Jeff.
Can I just stick my nose in here for a second and ask a question that Ajay was kind of getting at? But I'm curious, as he said, a picture's worth 1,000 words, so a picture can convey the idea of what we're trying to get at. But sometimes it can also say too much. So what happens when someone sees the picture and they fall in love with, I'll make up some crazy ones, but the orange building and the 3-foot, overhang out front.
Right.
And in the end, the buildings are green and the overhang is, 4 feet.
Yeah.
How do you kind of navigate between people's expectations of seeing a picture and then the reality is close, but they obviously have some liberties in how they adjust things? How much does the city hold to that, or, you see what I'm saying? Where
Yes.
people get
Yes.
married to something they see
Yeah.
in a picture that's not intended to be that prescriptive.
So a form-based code is going to provide options. I mean, of course, property rights are preserved, and the developer, the property owner, would have a lot of say in what they're going to build. And so, we have we're trying to, provide that predictability and convey this vision. At the same time, we're not going to be able to control everything. But a form-based code typically has, for like building types, they'll have 10 different options as far as the building type goes, for architectural features, or, as far as kind of the plaza area, however that's designed. If there's public space, there would be 10 different options. And so then there would be a chart, and it would be similar options as, you see on the screen. Then there would be a chart, depending on the different area, maybe the quadrants of the town center, or, the different zoning districts, that these would be allowable building types, or plaza types or frontage types within these different areas. So the idea is that you're going to provide a lot of acceptable options, but really they need to land pretty close to what's being, what is in the code. So, and if it's specifically called out, then of course they need to meet those items. But yeah, I know what you're saying about kind of the danger of just using, it would be replicating someone else's work, and I don't know that we want to do that, but yeah.
Well, in a way, that is a trade-off between providing enough information to the public to have a better understanding of what they can expect, and on the other side, the negative side of it is that, oh, you showed me this, but this is not there. I think that this is a trade-off that we have to look at it and see what is the best way to deal with it.
Yeah, the idea is to present different options and different possibilities, and then the developer, their designer, can put them all together.
And
But-
ideally, I'm sure that your consultant, they would have some architect involved, and they're the one that they put those rendering, and those renderings supposed to reflect code-based guidelines, and they say, okay, these are the things that is permitted, and based on incorporation of those base code guidelines, I put these rendering together to match what the
Be
town
more of a
standard is gonna look
sketch and less of a picture, but, more of a sketch like you see on the screen. That's kind of my expectation, so.
Who else? Go ahead, Mike.
I've maybe a series of questions. So I assume that the form-based code will be based on the area. So there's one for town center,
Yeah.
and eventually there might be one for a neighborhood center or something
Yes.
like that. Okay. I just want to make sure that I was tracking on that. And it actually feels like there's a lot of work in putting these together, that pulling the engineering piece, some of the, the planters and all of these kind of options, and then having multiple options. So I'm thinking that we've got a ton of work to try to figure those out. Is that typical? Because we're, in a sense, doing some of the design work for the builders, or the
Right.
developers,
Yeah.
right? So I am right about that.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to do that work. I'm looking
I mean,
forward to it.
it gives them a head start, gives them, that starting point, and, the questions that they would normally have, among themselves, we've already answered, because this is the city's vision, and this is what we want you to
Yeah.
build.
Yeah, no, that's what I was kind of assuming what you were showing. So then, from a developer standpoint, it seems like it would shorten the project timeline.
Potentially.
Because there wouldn't
yes.
be like, oh, now we need to do separate development agreements, or,
Right.
Hey, one of my architects here says, wouldn't this be super cool? It's, no, because the form-based code says we're not going to do that, so.
Yeah.
Or could it take longer? I don't know, what's your experience about that,
Shorter,
typically?
but that is one of the things that we need to review as well during this process, is the steps involved in the review. Right now, we have duplicating steps, and our hope is that we're going to resolve that.
Okay. And I'm just wondering, in terms of our process for kind of figuring all of this out and the options and trade-offs and all of that, sketches are awesome, they definitely help compared to just tables of numbers and all that. When this is done, are there any things where we might see some 3D modeling where we could kind of rotate it around, or maybe even models or anything like that? I'm trying to think ahead about how we could speed our process and ensure that the public has a good sense of what we're getting into and what we're going to settle on.
I can't answer that question. I don't know how difficult that would be to put
Okay.
together.
Well, something to think about in terms of.
It's not in our current scope with.
Well,
framework.
in the age of AI, you can use
Yeah,
that.
you would think that does. I mean, you
can
talked about
actually create
renderings, and
that
so
what if, and then instantly see it right there.
I think my 12-year-old granddaughter has done something where she could rotate
Yeah,
little
exactly,
models.
exactly.
That was, I know it's not that easy that a 12-year-old
It
could
might
do it.
be by now. I don't know.
So, but anyways, some of those kinds of things where we can really get public engagement
Yes.
beyond here's a sketch
Yeah.
could be something worth considering, and because these are pretty important decisions that will obviously direct this. And then last thing, you talked about grids and all of that, and I know earlier today we talked about you had some time in Chicago. Chicago's very flat, grid-like. The terrain around here is anything but that.
Right.
And so how would form-based code address where we've got steeps, well, not super steep slopes, Mary. Slope, a little bit slopey, and yeah, you understand what I'm saying. That it's a little more
Yeah.
complicated where you've got this kind of terrain.
I think we would be remiss if we didn't address it. You know, from a site development standpoint, you know, the critical areas, you know, the stormwater requirements, all of those are still in place.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah,
and
sacrosanct.
tree retention and things like that. So, you know, besides the natural landform, we have to keep those things into consideration.
Yeah. And maybe, and I'm just, because this is my only introduction so far, there might be options or forms, I don't know what the right word would be, for areas where there is, you know, some, you know, steeper areas versus flatter areas in our town center. So something else to just think about. So, okay. Well, this will be exciting to dive into this. I thought I started to learn about code, and now I'm going to have to know a whole new way of coding or something.
So I've had the opportunity to work on 3 different form-based codes and was part of a team that developed one a few years ago, and which was an award-winning effort. You know, this is basically, we're building an entire neighborhood here. And so, you know, how do we provide enough information to the development community, to the property owners, to get what we want built? And I think this is the way to do that. So, this last slide here.
Quick question, Matt. I like it so much. I'm visual, and it helps me see things, and it will bring consistency to the entire town center. It's going to be built to the flavor we want to see it.
Yes.
What's going through my mind is the dollar sign. Now that we are taking part of the development and pushing that cost to the city to do the upfront work in a more elaborate way, how much is that going to cost the city? Are we taking 1% and pushing it to the city from the developer, or are we taking 5% of the design cost? Because we are doing much upfront work.
Well, we're not designing each project for them. We're laying out options. The form-based code would provide options.
Guidelines.
Yes. Laying out visual options, though, and giving them direction that way. So after this is completed, that's really all the cost.
Because this is just for the town center.
Yes.
We cannot take it and go and use it somewhere else.
No, but I bet we could use some elements, and I can tell you
sure.
the form-based code that Framework is going to put together will borrow from elements elsewhere. So it's the only way you can get this kind of work done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Ajay.
Following up on what Commissioner Hisham just said, right? When we do this thing and they come and they say, okay, we've looked at your option, we're going to go with option C, and taking it on, who becomes the gate to ensure that they are true to option C? What if they start with option C and then there are a bunch of constraints that come up, or they just say, okay, not feasible enough for me to do option C, I'm going to go with option B or option A. And it's farther than what we thought. So somewhere somebody has to be that gate, right? To going back to the cost, doesn't that add up to the cost? Because now we're suddenly having a deliverable that is going to match to a plan and verification.
All of the options should be something that we want, and so there wouldn't be an option that is something that we don't.
Okay.
So that's, you know, hopefully that's part of the answer. But overall, it would just be like any other review process or permit that we've issued. If something changes, then it needs to be amended, or they need to start over, and regardless, they need to meet the guidelines. So,
Got it.
Yeah.
And that'll be minimal change to what we are doing as part of the review process right now.
Yeah, I don't think there would have to be anything special.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hopefully faster is what he said.
Well, so it's 7:25. I thought we would be done. Maybe I'm not the
So
best
maybe your
judge of
time
that.
estimate. John, did you have questions?
Sure. Again, like others, I think this is a good idea for heading towards on the town center. So, and drawing on some personal experience, I would expect that applications are going to be far more integrated and what we call ripe for review
Yes.
when they come in, because the engineering was already dictated and had to be coordinated with the architect before it even gets to the city. And internally, that avoids a food fight between transportation, parks, and public safety over where the curb cuts are, the fire hydrant, and the street trees. So everybody's on the same page when it comes in the door. Of course, the reviewers might adjust things, but it sets all of that stuff out. And this is probably timely in that Governor Ferguson's executive orders, I think he signed them yesterday, again, looking at permitting and speeding up the process. So, you know, there's trade-offs. The city's got to be a little more prepared in what they're doing in the design element, but can save a lot of time on the back end in review. The applicant's got to be a lot more prepared. They can't shove a bunch of stick drawings in the pipeline to reserve their spot because it doesn't meet our guidelines. So, yeah, there's trade-offs, but I think there's advantages for everyone. And Matt, I think your best example you said very early on was, this isn't like the old days. And in our case, QFC, Safeway, parking lot out front, strip mall in the back.
Right.
This is going to be a different look and feel, far more humane and I think livable for our city.
Yes,
That's it.
I'm on board.
Suda, I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did. So, Matt, is this your final slide, or do you have other?
I just had the upcoming steps after this one.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. So I really like it. I've seen in different, like in Las Vegas, they have like, you know, Town Center Mall where they used form-based code, kind of similar, but not exact. So I'm excited to have this. My question is like, is framework gonna come up with different options and bring it to Planning Commission next time? And then we're gonna review it and go with the majority? Is that the next steps?
Yes, well, we'll get there. That's not for the next meeting, but it's likely in the late spring that we would have a draft. Early summer that we would have a draft.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe late summer.
But the suggestion is well taken. I think that we should have some options and give us.
Yes.
Matt, I was going to ask you about, you said that you've had some previous experience on this. What was the level of your involvement? Is to put the regulations together, or you went all the way to during the construction, you were kind of involved and kind of.
All of the above. So,
And
yeah,
it would be good when you come back, when you bring it back, to give us some examples, even local examples, that city of so-and-so did the form-based, and this is the result, so we can see that. And
I can do that. I struggled with that for this because I wasn't sure exactly, you know, if you would be on board with everything, and then kind of how the discussion would
do you
unfold.
know if we have one locally?
There's several locally. I know that.
I'm going through my mind. I don't see anyone
So
that I know.
Framework has worked on two. One is the Lakeside District Station, and the other one is Lakewood, Washington.
Is it already been built?
It's been planned, and they have the code. Yeah. And the other one is the Highlands.
So Issaquah Highlands uses a form-based code.
The one that is already existing, the entire shopping center.
Which is part of the reason why I struggled with that, because that's a much different context. And then also, there are some issues there that I would hope that we're not going to build here. So
We learn from their mistakes.
I don't want to say it's a very nice development. It's very high quality, but I don't think that's what we're trying to do here. And that's really what I struggled with, is presenting kind of different, you know, places that wouldn't really fit, and I didn't want to detract.
But
from-
having some examples, that would really help us a lot.
Absolutely, I would be excited to do that. I've been studying this for my entire career, and you know, it's a good history if you're looking for a history lesson. How, you know, a lot of the planning and a lot of the development that's occurred since, you know, post World War II, you know, relied on, you know, the automobile. And this form-based codes were first developed in the 80s and late 90s, where they kind of took off, but it really focused on human scale and walkability and, you know, and the public space. So it's not, you know, it doesn't focus solely on kind of automobile-generated, you know, development.
And in those previous one that you worked on, was there any case that the local jurisdictions wanted to have a promenade kind of places, that there are no automobile, everybody's walking, and kind of?
Yeah, that's a little newer as far as, you know, having, like, closing down streets and that sort of thing. I mean, we had conversations about it, but it's something that we didn't do. But, I mean,
Do you see that something that would be?
Absolutely, yeah. So depending on how this unfolds and the grid pattern, that sort of, depending on the need of those streets, I could see, you know,
Even a block.
some streets being used as public space for an event or a weekend or something like that, where, you know, I know in other places they'll close down, you know, the streets for, you know, every Saturday and Sunday.
Bothell is doing.
Yeah. So in San Diego, they kind of, there were several places that have, you know, because of COVID and outdoor dining, that, you know, that they activated those spaces for outdoor dining, and they just never went back. And so entire streets, and you still have those little pavilions built and that sort of thing, and, you know, it works for them. And so I think it could be part of the conversation as well.
I would just add, I like the idea of examples, but then if we're going to look at examples, it's really, really important, going back to what I said before, that we don't get too caught up in a picture and not be able to see, you know, so what we want to see in the example is the form-based code described a green square and they got a blue square, and so that's how that worked. It was pretty good, right? Not that we want the green square, we want something else, but being able to see examples of how it worked, how the form-based code translated into reality, but not get caught up in that's what we're going to do, because it could be something totally different, right?
Yeah, I don't think we want to stifle creativity and all of that. You know, we want to provide direction and be very clear, you know, and provide that head start. But at the same time, I think we should be open to.
And I hope that you would, when you bring it up, you would kind of break it out into different subjects: transportation, open space, urban design, what else? Aesthetics.
We'll
different
try.
kind of breaking it down in that way.
It all fits together, though.
All fits together.
Yeah. So this slide is just two pictures from a Google search on town centers. And you could do that. You could do the same search or a form-based code, and this is essentially what, you know, you'll find. And, you know, the important elements, I mean, you have building design elements, you have architectural styles, you have, you know, but really it's this public space that's the challenge. And making that authentic and making that really work is, you know, what we need to do with this form-based code. So, yeah, there are plenty, I'll warn you a little, a lot of places call themselves town center, you know, a lot of places, lifestyle centers, there's all kinds of different names, but they're all not that. I mean, town centers are walkable, you know, they're, you know, the streets are, you know, they have traffic calming, they're not these busy, you know, loud places.
Hong Ying, did you have something?
Oh, yeah, just one quick question. So bouncing off what some people had said before, Sammamish has pretty complicated terrain, and buildings themselves are pretty complicated too. So to what degree of specificity would your drawings on the form-based codes show?
Well, I think we need to take the landform into consideration, but I don't think it's going to present every possibility. But, you know, I've seen, and you've seen it too, a lot of different developments that work with the existing terrain that fit together very well. There's different entrances and, at different elevations, and yeah, I think it can work. I don't see why it wouldn't, but it's something that we need to take into consideration. Yeah.
And then I think just one more thing. I know you mentioned that the development community would get a number of options for the way they could build. How would you ensure that each of those combinations of options work together to make something that's coherent, like aesthetically and construction-wise?
That's my expectation of the consultant doing that, yeah. And I think that's a discussion to have it here with the Planning Commission as well, yeah.
We'll hold Jeff accountable.
That's right.
I have two quick, or maybe one. So for any development that started, how does this impact that development?
Yeah, if they have their entitlements in place,
We're not going to do anything.
No.
And so there might be a portion of town center that looks different.
I want to say that, I think we're pretty fortunate that, the things that STCA is proposing fits.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I think it matches that vision.
Well, then they've done things similar, so
Yeah.
hopefully. And then just a quick, just building off of the going and seeing some, I think that would be helpful. And even if there's some that are not great examples, like you mentioned about the Highlands, and if we do that, it would be helpful. And I know we might do this on our own, that if you could say, here's where that form-based code is located. Review these kinds of pages out of that code, and then go and see how it was applied.
Yeah.
So I know I'd learn a ton by doing that. So if it makes sense and it isn't too onerous for you all to provide that kind of guidance, that would be useful.
Yeah, there's several examples out there that I think would be beneficial. A couple of the places that I kind of wanted to include in this, but I didn't, is Santana Row in San Jose, California. Very high-quality development, but overall, it works. The whole thing just works. And that was built 20 years ago, and it continues to thrive. Very good example. That's probably the best example I have. Seaside, Florida was the first one. It was, that's from The Truman Show. Are you familiar with that movie? That's where The Truman Show was filmed. And it was filmed there because it's kind of this, this ideal community to live in. There's some problems with it now, but 30 years ago when that was first built, I mean, and it continues, it's a very nice place to live. But it's also a destination, and traffic is not great, and they've done some things with their parking and pedestrian movement that doesn't quite fit in, but that was the first. That was the first one out of the gate. Reston, Virginia, that's another great example, but that was, here's kind of the challenge with me presenting these, that was more commercial than it was. There's not a lot of residential in that development. It's basically an outdoor mall, and I don't think that's what we want. It has some great green space that's used as kind of a town center or town square, that is really active. They have a lot of events and art shows and that sort of thing, but I know now that they're having a lot of trouble because of parking, because you have to pay to park, and people don't want to do that. So some of the stores are closing. So not the best example, but it is an example. Zona Rosa in Kansas City, that was built around 2010. It's another good example, but they really missed out. There's not as much residential as there should be, and then the first few phases, if you visited it there, it just didn't seem authentic. It just wasn't. Seemed just out of place and wasn't really active yet, and that's really the challenge of town centers. I have a load of other, examples that I can provide to you, and look forward to continuing this discussion.
If there's any that happen to be in Hawaii, make sure and let us know those.
So
Exactly.
So in addition to the formal zone code, there's probably plenty of examples that as we go about our daily lives, you'll see something, the way the sidewalk and maybe a street's been closed, that'll give us ideas and insights and what the possibilities are.
Yeah.
They weren't designed from the ground up that way, but for whatever reason, they ended up that way. Bothel's done a huge amount of redevelopment. A lot of cities around us have built new town centers, maybe not with form-based codes, but just the ability to keep our eye out for those nice examples.
A lot of your old main streets kind of reflect that. They're built with form-based code principles.
Actually, John, if you on Sunday, go to Ballard's Market. I don't know if you've been there. There's a side street, I think it goes parallel to the Market Street.
I've eaten there many times.
Yeah, and after COVID, part of the street is now being taken over by a restaurant. Part of the right-of-way is actually blocked and has been used as an extension of a restaurant. And there's no cars involved, and for the whole afternoon, the street is totally closed, and my God, zillions of people walking around and enjoying themselves. I want to kind of follow up on Mike's question as far as the scheduling. As I understand, there's some projects within the town center is under review, right? Are they grandfathered in?
Are permitted.
Are they grandfathered in, or will be grandfathered in as far as the applicability of the?
Right now, we have the 2 townhome developments that are under permit review, so they would be grandfathered in. And then there's another phase, which is kind of at the center of the TCA one, and that would be mixed-use buildings, and that's received its entitlements. Essentially, there's a first step is a review. It went through the UZDP process and was approved, so that would be grandfathered. I'm not aware of other. There's a couple. The Aegis development, which is across on the east side of 228, that's been approved and is moving towards permit.
And what's your timeline as far as the completion of this?
In the summer.
Summer.
Late spring, summer.
And then it's going to go through the process and get adopted?
Yes. That's the slide.
I have a different question, Mayor. And at the city council meeting last Tuesday, there was a presentation made by David. I think that was a town center code amendment, if I'm not mistaken. I saw a document which kind of caught my eyes that the building heights now has been increased to 150 feet.
So
what is that?
I think what he was probably talking about, so we did send out a notice on January 8th. It was a notice of determination of significance related to SEPA, and then an invitation to comment on the scoping. So there's a list on there in the notice of different things that are being considered. Nothing has been decided. It will be something that we'll be discussing with the Planning Commission and with City Council and asking you guys to weigh in on.
What is it right now, the maximum building heights? It was substantially less, as I recall.
Yeah, 75 feet.
So we're doubling it? Wow.
It's a conversation to have, and that's about density, but it's also, one of the trade-offs we're considering is, do we want taller buildings with more green space? And so it would be a way to potentially preserve green space.
And the implication of it on some of the things like building shadows and how that affects the light.
That's part of the
150
discussion.
feet, that's quite a...
Definitely part of the discussion.
I had just a couple of quick final ones on the topic of examples. It would be interesting, I think, along the way, if there are some examples where maybe they should have done this and they didn't, and this is what they got.
There's a lot of those.
Yeah, that might help recent, especially if it's recent and nearby. I think there might be some. That would help us go, oh, yeah, now I see when you don't do this, what happens, right? Because we could argue a lot about, well, what do you get when you do this? But then seeing the alternative might be useful. So I'd suggest blending that in.
You're planning my next few weekends. That's
good. That's what I'm here for. And then I guess I didn't quite catch, is the goal, or is the goal eventually, and maybe it's 10 years, right, but to extend this to all of our code for all different parts of the city?
I don't think it's necessary. You know, the residential sections of the code work. The neighborhood center's effort, I think, will reflect a lot of this work. It may not be exactly a form-based code, but, you know, some elements of it. It could be form-based, I don't know. But I don't think our entire code would need to be exactly that. It could be, though. I mean, we'll see how it works. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
And Mark, let me just say real quick, so form-based code, so part of that plan, it requires a build-to line rather than a setback. And for single-family homes and neighborhoods, people really, they want their front yard, and they want to have some distance from the street. That's why I'm saying it may not work, so, yeah.
Matt, have you been to U Village,
What is it?
University Village?
No,
Is that a form code
I think it
place?
is. Yeah, I just.
It's a very, very successful operation. I mean, and you see different variety of the building, different modulations, different mixture of the vehicular traffic, pedestrians, and it's functioning very, of course, much, much bigger than I think that what we were talking about.
I think I think they won an award, and I saw something today, I read something about it. But that's going to be on my list to visit.
Suda, anything else?
I do. Thank you, Chair, for not forgetting me. So Matt, a quick question. Since you have been to have known all these different farm-based codes, was there any criteria they used for each of these? Like, for example, reduce traffic. In Las Vegas, they wanted to avoid traffic in the town square mall, right? Or like have more residential apartments above the markets. Were there any top 5 criteria each of them used, or?
I don't know about a top 5 criteria. Every code that I've worked with has an infrastructure plan, and then, basically a plan of how that would be implemented. And then the roads themselves are, if they're considered they wouldn't be an arterial, but, they might be a primary street and a secondary street and that sort of thing. And so really identifying how they operate and then, what would be built around them. A lot of your secondary streets are going to have less traffic, where your primary streets might be feeders that come off the arterials and then feed into the secondary streets. But that's kind of the hierarchy that I'm envisioning, and I'm assuming that that's the direction we're headed.
Anything else, Suda? Was that it?
I think that's it, yeah.
Okay.
For the time being, yes.
Thanks. Syed, did you have a last thought?
I just was going to say that over the last few years, city has gone through a lot of public involvement and discussion with the public. It would be really useful if you look at it, because that gives you an idea what the public they wanted it, and use that as a basis to put the regulations and the things together.
Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a great point, Commissioner.
I think we're landing on an hour.
Amazing.
Amazing.
All right. Exciting things ahead in the next year. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
And if you need any weekend planning, let me know. Let's do agenda-related public comments, 7 minutes per person. So either of our topics this evening, would anyone like to make agenda public comment? You could do rock, paper, scissors and decide.
Hello, planning commissioners, Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Real good meeting overall. Lots of good comments across the board, and I support form-based code, have some experience in it. Have a few snippets to share. It's exciting to hear that Matt has his whole career in form-based. That brings a lot of value to the community as far as I'm concerned. Redmond, a couple points, and I'm jumping in things based on what I heard. Went to a city council meeting in Redmond a couple years ago that was a joint meeting with our Sammamish City Council. And a couple of the city council members in Redmond said the best thing they ever did in putting together their whole downtown, which before I tell you what it is, they're kind of stuck because the whole thing's flat. But having said that, they created massing models that helped their city council understand everything. So it might be worth a reach out to whoever is involved in Redmond, and I don't know if there's a better technology now or not, but they said that to a person at that meeting. That city council said that's what helped us decide how to do our city. And again, they have canyons because they don't have the, topography. I think we have tremendous opportunity because of that here, to not create that to happen. Also think of the Redmond Town Center. I don't have these years exactly right, but I think it began in like 1995 or 6. It was being built, maybe a couple years before. And I went into Redmond in about 2012 or 13 when the last comp plan was getting started in Sammamish. Maybe it was 2014. And the planners told me the thing we didn't do right was not put housing in. Now, we all know they've added a lot of housing. What I don't know, and I'm not playing a game and have a secret answer, I don't know the answer. How many housing units in and near town center have been built since they flipped the switch to meet their housing needs relative to the commercial center they had? I'm not saying Sammamish has to follow that to a T, but Commissioner Mark Boffman talked about getting answers of what did and didn't work and different examples. It would be interesting to see what Redmond chose to do with what was the right housing mix for that fairly large commercial center that they had. In the January 7th, that's where the 7th came from, July. In the January 7th agenda packet of City Council, the framework contract has a number on it of $235,000. And one of the PDFs I sent in today, yes, it had my markups on it, but that contract amount is in there. And something else on there that I am genuinely curious about, it's not a challenge, not upset, just curious. Within that contract of framework on page 12, and I don't know this by heart, I snipped it out and cut it out. There's a sentence on page 12 that says, the town center development regulations will be overhauled to better align with community goals for town center and ensure positive outcomes. The thing I asked in my text box off to the side was, what are the community goals for town center? Is there a complete list at this time? If so, who has been managing that list? And for what duration of time has that list been made? So I'm thinking it could be other than these two things I'm going to say. I might be way the heck off base on either. But either there's no list, and this is just a statement that would allow future consensus to guide where we're headed, or there really is a comprehensive list. I'd like to know as to where is it and who's guiding that list. And hey, there's no doubt there's going to be a lot of different opinions on that list, and that's okay. I just want to know if there is a list or if that's just a statement. And that was mentioned this evening, and I think that's an important thing too. Commissioner Safavian talked about Ude Village, and Matt said that he might go there and look around. I don't know why I saw this in today's Seattle Times, but the original 70-year-old Burgermaster is closing. So if you want to get over there and enjoy a piece of Seattle history and a very fun place to go, and it's going to have a big mixed-use project joining in, but I did note in that article there are still 5 more around. So it's the Seattle, well, it's not quite the Seattle version of In-N-Out. That's probably more Dick's Burgers. But anyway, a couple other things. Back in 2013, October-ish, September-ish, there was a short course on planning in Sammamish presented before the second comprehensive plan got started on, done by one of the authors of the GMA. His name was Joe Tovar. And Joe put a slide up in this short course on planning that showed the Mississippi River with these huge widths with levees on both sides. I call them banks, but I think they're levees. And what Joe said is the GMA gives a jurisdiction wide discretion, but there's still bounds. I applaud a form-based code that keeps control on what the city wants, but also allows flexibility. I don't want to let either development or political interest railroad the approach to a fair compromise in outcomes, because let's just say in the history of Sammamish, there has been attempts at both. Appreciate the chance to speak.
So while Mary walks up here, I'll point out, Paul, that I usually don't get to eat dinner before these meetings. So when you bring up Burger Master and Dick's, I'm just, my stomach's now growling.
Hi, Mary Victor, Sammamish. Thanks for a really good discussion and great presentations from Matt. I'm going to speak to the part that Miriam did at the beginning. So if you don't want to say people's names, you can say, we heard in public comment, or you can say, we heard from Mary. But I think it's really important to say what you heard and what the use is and whether it gets subscribed to the name. I don't come up here to be famous or notorious. I come up here because I research a lot. So based on that, I'm going to give some feedback on the changes that you're making. One of the reasons that all the comp plan and the critical areas, I just felt very out of it, public comment-wise, was you guys and city council submits questions. We never see them until they get put to a matrix later. Convo, I don't even know what that is. I don't know how to log into it. I can't see anything on there. It seems like you guys are having all these little secret meetings, which is why I think OPMA kind of came out of Miriam's mouth a lot. What I'm going to use is I'm going to call it discourse. It's important to have discourse. Discourse is where you ask questions and you discuss. I asked Alexa what discourse meant. You can ask that at home. But what we need is that, because I think from seeing Paul, who's been at this a year and a half longer than me, and me almost 10 years and giving public comment, we study a lot so we can learn. I can't even make a comment or make questions until I've had some information given to me. Otherwise, I'm just like a third grader or a kindergartner, and I just don't know, and I can say amazing creative things. But it's really important that you know when you study. So when we see your questions or we hear them, or like if the same question gets asked 3 times, then you know that one's a little bit more important. So I think it's really important to do that. And I don't know how you're going to do it. Like, I know that David Pyle has said at meetings, we meet with Mary all the time. Well, he doesn't meet with me. I think he hears what I say at the microphone, and I think they listen to it. But I've only ever met with them like once and a half, like for an hour, which is not a lot of time in 10 years. So we need to have a way to get a voice in. And I love at these meetings that we get 7 minutes, and Planning Commission in the past has stood up and said we need to keep the 7 minutes because they're very useful. But what happens is your meeting runs long, everybody's tired, we speak, and boom, it's gone. And it's like, you wonder if anything ever happens with that. And I know that it does get listened to because I've had stuff picked up from it. But so I would encourage you, if you're going to set time limits, that after we speak, like sometimes we actually answer some of the questions that you have. Like I can say that one of the things I felt was ignored in public comment was landslide hazards and steep slopes. Nobody ever really talked about them. No code got changed. We still have the same problems. I'm left maybe trying to get the way staff implements it to be a little bit different. However, something like cumulative impacts, I got channeled one day by Mike Bresco. He talked about that. It's in King County Code. Avril Beatty added that to the code. So we have that in code that got adopted. And it's really only about 1-2 sentences, not a lot. But sometimes just getting a few key words in code are very important. So I think when we speak for the 7 minutes, and I'm grateful for that, and I know it's near the end of the meeting, I think there needs to be a little bit wrap up rather than just closing. Like, I don't know if anybody has more comments or important things, because I don't know how that gets forwarded. And city council, unless they come listen or watch it, they're not going to see it. So I think I'm spending most of my time on this because I think it is so important that you guys learn up front. You have the little meetings. Like if there's going to be meetings on Tuesday and there's Zoom, you know, if you're not going to let public speak, that's fine, but it'd be great if we could just Zoom in and listen, because I hear a lot, I research a lot. For example, on town centers, I've been to Santana Row, I've researched it online. I've researched Seaside online. I've been to other places. I was going to mention Ballard, somebody mentioned that. Bothell has had a lot of changes. That's where I moved when I first lived here. I would even say Totem Lake area has really changed. It had a lot of trouble being real for a long time, and they have a lot of connected travel and trails that you can do. And I think some of the things they're building works good there. I think some things in Kirkland you could look at, so those are a little bit closer. And I think giving people a spot where you could go to and visit with some points, like look at this, or, you know, whatever. I think if it just a short thing is written up, you know, even half a page with 4 bullet points or something or other, I think people will drive. I'll drive to places. In fact, I drive for other things anyway, so I can drive. So I think all the comments that were given and what everybody said, I think we all do a good job. We're all trying hard. It just needs to meld together better so that we know what we're saying, we learn, we ask better questions, and then we actually make sure that we do impact some of the changes that we've talked about in the areas of concern. And then just on the note, I grew up in Bozeman, Montana. I lived there until I was 18 on a farm, great big farm. So I'm a farm girl, I work hard. And I still do a lot of their city meetings because I'm a landowner there. And Bozeman is really, like, it's the most livable place, the last best place, kind of very similar to Sammamish. It's about 65,000 people. It does have Montana State University. But because I do the meetings there and sometimes I can Zoom into them, they've done a couple things that were really good. So I already mentioned that part in the non-agenda comment that there's the 3,300 units that are needed for a neighborhood center, which means a town center needs more than that. So yes, you need more than 4,000 units in town center. And then I did speak a little bit on co-housing at one of the meetings. I went back and listened to it. Co-housing is just a type of use, and it also fits in with something that I emailed in for yesterday for today called, it's for R3, it's kind of a new zoning, and it's called Apartment Buildings Limited. So instead of having R4 where you can go really tall a lot of places and really multiple stacked units, the R3, the limited, is that they kind of do a form that you get a building. It can be 120 to 160 feet long, and then the units can only be up to 10,000 square feet. But you have to consider parking and where people are going to have green stuff and where they're going to have shared spaces and where the kitchens are going to be. And depending on what you do that, instead of just getting 4 or 5 units, which is what the old code in Bozeman has, you can get 5 to 8 units. And that was done through in a text amendment, which I know Miriam is familiar with text amendments. I've submitted them. It was a text amendment by the co-housing people, and it's actually getting built very near where my brother lives, so I get to see that every time I go to Bozeman. But I think that's one example of, like, if you read that, the code is just that one screen capture. It just gives a couple different things, and it's like, I think you can only go to the 160 foot length in building if you have a 0.55 acre, so it has to be a little bit bigger. But it can be done on a single unit and a single development. It's an alternative to doing a house with multiple ADUs or just duplexes or just townhomes, and I think it's really important. So look at my emails, and I'll re-forward the ones that I sent before so you can look at them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Lena, anybody online?
Nobody online.
All right. Anything else from Matt or Miriam? I just want to point out how well that time thing worked. Maybe. I'll take it. All right. I think that's it for this evening. Would someone like to move to adjourn?
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.